If you're in the market for a phone that offers a great experience with lots of great features and capabilities but don't want to spend a lot of money, there are a few options out there. And two of the best phones, or most well known, come from Samsung and Google. Those are of course the Galaxy A54 and the Pixel 6a. But which should you buy? I'm Cam Bunton from Pocket-lint, and in this video I'll hopefully help you to decide. And while you're here, if you do like it, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap the notification bell. When it comes to design and durability, there's one thing that may sway your decision when picking between these two phones, and that's the size. There's quite a big difference between how the Pixel and the Galaxy phones feel in the hand. Samsung's phone is noticeably taller, wider and heavier than the Pixel phone. Google's phone is a pretty nimble one-handed device, where the A54 is a quite large device. Its slimness helps somewhat, but it's not as compact as the Pixel. And the two companies took contrasting approaches to both materials and aesthetics. Pixel's phone has a sturdy aluminium frame that gives the phone a slightly more rigid feeling. However, Samsung has put a higher grade glass on the front and on the back, so its outer surfaces should be more resistant to bangs and knocks. But saying that, the Pixel's plastic back isn't likely to crack like glass might with the wrong kind of impact. Water and dust resistance is exactly the same on both, and it's something you don't get from a lot of other phones in this price bracket. It's IP67, meaning it can withstand any dust and will survive up to 30 minutes in shallow, fresh water. In real life terms, that just means when you answer the phone in the rain or accidentally drop it in the water, it'll most certainly survive unscathed. As for looks, that's entirely subjective. I personally quite like both approaches. The two-tone green panel with the black framing and camera bar on the Pixel is distinctive, making it easily recognizable as a Pixel phone. Samsung's clean and minimal approach to the Galaxy phone has strong appeal as well, although that feeling is somewhat tarnished by the plasticky look of the frame. On the whole, from a design perspective, I'm more of a fan of the smaller, more compact Pixel design overall. And as neat the rounded corners and the bezel are on the Samsung, I quite like the rectangular minimalist look on the front of the Pixel. There is benefit to Samsung's size though, but that all comes to the fore when looking at the features and performance. So let's dive into the display and software first. Now, there are a few ways to compare the displays, the media experience and the software. On paper, the Samsung has a lot going for it, and that's reflected in the display performance. It's the bigger of the two screens, it's 6.4 inches versus the 6.1 on the Pixel, and it's also not as narrow, featuring a slightly wider aspect ratio. You get more of that feeling of an expansive, immersive view from this screen than you do on the Pixel. Both are Full HD Plus resolutions though, so there's no real noticeable difference in terms of sharpness and detail. Technically, the Pixel screen does squeeze in a few more pixels per inch, but it's not a difference that you can easily see with the naked eye. It's in color reproduction we saw the biggest differences between the two screens, because both have different color modes. Samsung's Vivid mode is the default and it's far too saturated, so we set it to the natural mode instead. Pixel has boosted, adaptive and natural modes, so again we set to natural for a comparison. With both set to this mode, the one thing that stands out is Samsung's screen still saturates the colours quite a lot, with oranges and reds in particular getting to that point where you start to lose detail because of the slightly overblown colour. Whites in scenes take on a more golden tone, where the Pixel is a lot cleaner. Colours in Pixel's screen are a lot more muted, often to its detriment, but switching to adaptive mode does give it a more vibrant look that matches the Samsung, but with slightly less red, warm overtones. Perhaps surprisingly, we found both displays were adequately bright in most situations. Samsung's screen has got a technically higher general brightness, but it's tough to see in normal conditions. Outdoors in bright sunlight though, Samsung was slightly better at cutting through those bright light beams reflecting on the glass. Both are HDR10 Plus compatible though, so they're pretty much the same there. Now, one area the Samsung does beat the Pixel is in refresh rates. It can deliver up to 120Hz and can switch between 60 and 120 depending on what content is on the display. Pixel is locked to 60, and you can see the difference when you go from one to the other. Scrolling quickly through the software elements is sharper and smoother on the Samsung display. Software, on the other hand, is a very different experience on the two phones. Samsung's One UI is about as far removed from the stock Android on the Pixel that you can get. It adds a lot of bloat and a completely different design for the drop-down and the settings menus. It also comes with a lot of additional duplicate or redundant apps that take quite a bit of space up on the storage. With that said, if you're concerned about overall longevity and support, the Samsung is perhaps surprisingly supported for longer than the Pixel. Samsung is offering 4 years of major updates and 5 years of security patches. Pixel 6a gets 3 years of software updates and 5 years of security patches. It is worth noting here though that the Pixel 6a is older and has one software update already under its belt. But because it's a Google phone, it should get major updates almost as soon as they're available. Samsung typically takes a couple of months to get major updates out, but it has a fantastic recent track record of delivering security patches. Now, when it comes to everyday speed and fluidity, there's no massive difference between the Pixel 6a and the A54. Run them through a benchmark test and you'll see the Pixel phone scores slightly higher on those in both single and multi-core tests. And if you launch apps side by side, the Pixel does load most apps and games ever so slightly faster than the Samsung. The important thing to take away is that both feel quick and responsive enough that unless you're used to the absolute top speedy responsive flagships from the past year or two, you'll be perfectly happy with either phone. They can run just about anything without any trouble, although it has to be said, the Pixel 6a doesn't seem to take much to start feeling warm to the touch on the back of the phone. Playing a game for 10 to 15 minutes is enough for it to start feeling warm, or even launching the camera and taking photos. It never gets uncomfortably hot, but it definitely feels warmer to the touch than Samsung's with similar usage. So that's something to look out for, particularly in the warmer months of the year. There's no real contest when it comes to battery life. Both are good, but the A54 consistently lasts longer. It's not quite the 2-day phone that Samsung says it is, but its excellent power management meant we'd usually finish the day at about 40% at about 11 PM, having taken it off charge at 8 AM in the morning. Pixel 6a with the same usage was usually around 30%. This is with about 2 or 3 hours of social media, gaming, WhatsApp messaging, music listening, and web browsing. Now, none of this is any real surprise because the Samsung has a 5,000 mAh capacity, which is considerably higher than 4,410 that's on the Pixel. And neither has particularly fast charging, with Samsung's 25-watt wired solution with the right charger taking more than an hour for a full charge. Pixel's 18-watt limit is even slower still. Okay, let's talk cameras for a bit, because for a lot of people the question when buying phones is which has the best camera. And there's not really a simple answer to that because they both have strengths and weaknesses. Both phones have a primary and ultra-wide camera. Pixel has two 12-megapixel sensors, Samsung has a 50 and a 12. Samsung also has a low-resolution 5-megapixel macro sensor adding to it, but it's difficult to get good images from that. A lot of what you see in still photos from the two depends more on the computational photography and the processing of colors and light. And there's a clear difference between them most of the time. Samsung's photos, generally speaking, are brighter and more color-rich, which is good in some ways in that it lifts more light out of the shadows than the Pixel. It's bad because in the brighter highlights of the images, Samsung's phone blows out and loses quite a lot of details. Pixel's phones tend to even out those bright highlights more effectively, allowing you to see the color and the texture, dropping the exposure to deliver those with more color and natural texture, but it can leave the photos looking a bit darker and more crushed. It still has a slightly oversaturated look to the colors, but most of the time the colors were a closer representation of the actual colors of the subject. Samsung's ability to draw in more light from the primary camera does benefit in lower light situations too, generally delivering slightly brighter shots where there's not as much light available. But when you switch to the ultra-wide, it's considerably poorer than the main camera, and struggles to retain the sharpness and detail. The ultra-wide on the Pixel was better at retaining those details, and was much better at matching the color, contrast and look of the primary sensor than Samsung's was. As a whole system, I prefer to have that consistency, and even though Samsung pictures are brighter and more vibrant, its tendency to blow out highlights and lose that detail in daylight meant I would much rather have the slightly darker images from the Pixel. You can always crank up the brightness after anyway. In the end, there are a couple of things that stand out for me comparing these two phones. If you care most about having the best display and the best battery, the Galaxy A54 is the one to go for. It's also got one good camera, and copes better with extended use and doesn't get too warm. The other thing worth noting is that it has a micro SD card slot, so you can expand the storage where you can't on the Pixel. It's also going to be supported for longer with software updates because it's a newer phone. So for most people, on balance, the Galaxy A54 is probably the best phone. However, my own personal preference is the Pixel 6a. It's smaller, lighter, I prefer the lighter stock Android software, plus the camera system is more consistent, delivering similar results across the two lenses, where Samsung's has one lens that's clearly better than the other. Now, prices aren't too dissimilar. For 128GB storage, you're looking at around a difference of £50 in the full retail price, at least in the UK, with the Samsungs being slightly more expensive, but with various offers, discounts and sales, you'll find them mostly near enough the same price. I've been Cam. Let me know what you think of these two phones in the comments down below, or you can grab me on Twitter. I'm at Cam Bunton. If you did like this video, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap the notification bell, and then you won't miss any more of our uploads. I'll see you again in the next one. Bye for now.